Well, one of the most common arguments for the existence of God is the cosmological argument. Now, it comes in many different forms, talking about first cause or, prime mover or beginning of the universe. But it's very commonly referred to or presented as the cosmological argument for God's existence, or the Kalam cosmological argument that says, in a sense, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, this is an argument that obviously has a lot of pushback, and people have comments and questions and objections to this argument, and that's what I want to talk about a little bit in today's show, because this is part 11 of my series, walking through Armin Navabi's book, Why There Is No God, Simple Responses to 20 Common Arguments for the Existence of God. Armin Navabi is part of the Atheist Republic, the founder of it, and he has written this book in an attempt to help people understand what atheists believe and how they would respond to common arguments for God's existence. In fact, I want to read you a short section from Armin's website at Atheist Republic of who this book is for. And he specifically points out the believer, and this is the same reason why I'm going through this series. So Armin writes on his website, as a believer, you may find that you disagree with much of what is said here, and that's okay. Reading this book will allow you to see what many atheists believe and how some people may question the beliefs that you hold. If you plan to defend your faith in discussions, this book can help you understand the reasoning behind the lack of belief in your opponents. Knowing this will help you debate from a more informed position, and the atheists you talk to may appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to understand and consider their arguments. Knowing and appreciating the opponent's point of view can help you start a productive discussion regarding God and religion in a more constructive way. I love how he says that to believers, and that's why I want to do this, is I wanted to present to all of you who are Christians watching, here's what an atheist, Armin Navabi at least, not all atheists, but what Armin believes is objections to these common arguments for God's existence. And so I want you to see what these are, but then also how I would respond. So hopefully it pushes that conversation a little bit further, not only seeing what an atheist believes against these arguments, but then how he objects, and then how I would respond to those objections. And so you can kind of think through that response as well and have a more productive conversation. As well as atheists, you then can see not only the original arguments that Christians make, what the atheist objection is, and the Christian response, so then you can figure out how to respond to at least my responses and how I would talk about these issues. The other thing I want to point out, though, that I really appreciate what he says here, he says, this book is to help you understand the reasoning behind a lack of beliefs, and knowing this will help you debate from a more informed position. The atheists you talk to may appreciate the fact that you've taken time to understand and consider their arguments. And this is what I want to highlight. As if you've been following this series, one of my frustrations is often in the conversations between atheists and Christians, there's not a desire to understand. There's not a desire to steel man or strong man or make the best presentation of the other side, but really to straw man it and to use weak reasoning and just kind of dismiss certain claims that individuals on the other side make. And so I think that we can do better, all of us, at understanding the other side's arguments, at responding better, to respond more well-informed. And I'm going to show some examples of where I don't think Armin does that well here. And maybe, again, he's dealing with space. In fact, I just finished writing my first chapter for a book. It's a book on artificial intelligence, and I contributed a chapter on a theology of technology. And I was given a 20 to 25 page limit for my chapter. But I could not figure out how to condense everything I wanted to say into that one chapter of 20 to 25 pages. And I ended up writing like 36. I thought it was funny. In high school, it's like, write a 10-page paper. It's like, 10 pages. Are you kidding me? And now it's like, you got 20 to 25 pages to say something. And I'm like, I'll take 36. Anyways, I was able to chop it down to like 29, and I couldn't really get it much lower than that without cutting out stuff that I really thought needed to be communicated. Had others read it, and you chop out stuff you think is irrelevant. And finally the publisher said, yeah, okay, that's fine. You can turn it in at 29. And so, hey, I recognize Armin is probably dealing with page limits, word limits in each chapter. He can't include everything. But thanks, Slammer, good to see you here. Appreciate that. But at the same time, there's things the ways in which we can speak that shows we've at least considered what the other side has to say and their objections. And so that is why I want to take the time and I want to work through this and hopefully provide some thoughts and explanations and understanding on these different arguments and objections to hopefully make this conversation a little bit better. So whether you're a Christian or an atheist listening, I hope that this can lead to a more productive conversation and dialogue. And as always, if you are watching live on YouTube or Instagram, you can join and call in. And so again, I like the pushbacks. I like the comments. So if you want to comment in either of the comment sections, I'll be watching those and can respond. But also if you want to call in and discuss something that's on your mind, that option as well is there as well. So click on the link and you can call in live. If you are not watching live and you're watching after the fact or listening after the fact on podcast or radio, then just follow on social media at Ryan Pauly 3, and that'll keep you up to date on what when my shows are and when I normally am going live. Now, really quickly, as I jump in, I want to address two things. Number one is I've taken a little break. It hasn't been a break, but also I want to address a comment based on an atheist response in one of my previous videos. So first, I haven't been here for a couple weeks. It's not because I was necessarily on break or vacation. But I was serving on faculty at Summit Ministries in Colorado. And so this is a 12-day conference for 16 to 22-year-olds where I went, and I was the faculty in residence, which means I gave 4 lectures. I did an atheist role play. I lectured on gender identity, entertainment, and technology. And then I'm also available for breakfast, lunch, dinner, free time, activity time, just to talk to students and help them think through answers and questions. And so that's what I've been doing the last 2 weeks. Haven't posted much, haven't been on YouTube just because of how busy that is and wanting to be intentional with my time there with the students. But it was a blast. It was an incredible time. We saw some amazing transformation in the students' lives. And so, hey, if you're here from Summit and you're watching or listening, it's good to see you or good to have you here. Man, my family and I were so blessed and had a wonderful time. And so thanks for having us there. But that's kind of where I've been. And so it was great. I can talk more about that later if you want. The other thing I want to address before getting to chapter 11 is, hello, logician, is a comment that came in on a recent YouTube video where I was responding to Armin's comment of hey, Christians, you're an atheist when it comes to Zeus or Thor. I just go one God further, famous Richard Dawkins quote as well. And I kind of responded, I said, look, I don't get it. I don't get why atheists say this. I don't get why Dawkins said it. It just doesn't make sense. I'm not an atheist. I'm a theist. In no way am I an atheist, just like I use the example of I'm married. I'm married to my wife. And to say, well, you're a bachelor when it comes to Susan or these other women, or you're a bachelor when it comes to the billion other women in the world. It's like, but I'm not a bachelor. I'm married. And I've never understood that. And I had some atheists comment in and respond and say, well, it's not an argument for, against God, but it's trying to help the Christian understand why we don't believe. It's just simply saying, look, you don't believe in Zeus. Well, just like you don't believe in Zeus, that's why I don't believe in your God. And I go, okay, that makes more sense, at least, of what you're trying to accomplish. At the same time, I had a few thoughts. Number one is it's weird to kind of have to be told of why someone doesn't believe. Like, all of us just don't believe in something, and that we get why there's things that we believe in and things that we don't believe in. And so to try to have this whole line of reasoning to help the Christian understand why they don't believe, I don't know why that's necessary. Now, maybe there are Christians that are talking to atheists that are saying, well, I don't get why you can't believe in God. And it's probably because they think the evidence is so good. How can you not believe? And so that's what they're trying to ask, not like, how is it possible that there are things that you don't believe in? Because all of us have things that we don't believe in. The other thought I had in response to, if we're going to use the comment in that way, just to say, hey, just like you don't believe in Zeus, that's why I don't believe in your God, seems to equate these pantheon of gods and Zeus and Thor and Poseidon as being equivalent to the Christian God. And I don't think that's true. The Christian God is claimed to be, in a sense, transcendent, the creator of all things. These other gods are created beings inside of the natural world. And so they're not the same in that sense. And so we're to kind of equate it, I think, is missing the conversation, as if the evidence for the Christian God is equal to the evidence of these other gods. And I think many atheists will respond to this probably and say, well, it is equal. There's no evidence for those. There's no evidence for your God. I just don't think that's taking an accurate reflection of the literature and the conversation that has taken place to say that they are perfectly equivalent in that way. I think the second thought I had on this is, is this idea of it's not as if I don't believe in Zeus is the same way you don't believe in my God, is because many atheists will say, well, it's not that I say God does not exist. I simply have a lack of belief in God. And so for me, when it comes to Zeus and Poseidon and these other gods, I don't have a lack of belief in them. I would actually say they don't exist. They're not real gods. And so it's not the same in that sense. So I would actually have a positive belief that these other gods are not God, the Zeus and whatever, versus the atheist was, I'm not saying that there is no God. I'm saying I simply lack a belief in God. And so I think that there's actually a different approach as well. And how we are even looking at these as well. And so it's not equivalent in that way as well. So I still think it's just not the most helpful comment, which is why I include that in the video where I mentioned here are things that both Christians and atheists should not believe in. So Logician comments in here, says, you believe 4 million men are not your father. I just go one man more and say you don't have a father at all. I get what that is trying to say, is I just go one father at all, one father further. But the whole point is, but I have a father, and I believe I have a father, and it's not these other people, but that doesn't change the fact that I do believe this. And so I just, I still, I guess, am remaining, while I understand better, I still am remaining unconvinced that it's a helpful thing to include in this conversation. So with that being said, I'm happy to address more of that. There's also questions that came in on Instagram that I'm going to talk about at the end. I do want to jump in here to chapter 11 by Armin Navabi and kind of get to the meat of this show. And so he titles his chapter 11, If There Is No God, Where Did Everything Come From? Without God, there is no explanation. And so he jumps in right from the beginning and says, look, this is one of the biggest questions that scientists have been trying to discover and figure out for a long time, is the origin of the universe. And he says, in reality, though, the simple answer is, I don't know. I don't know where the universe came from. He goes, look, we may never know. However, he says, not knowing the answer does not give us free range to make something up. Now, again, I would agree here, right? And when I do atheist role plays, Christians often challenge me. Well, if you're an atheist and there's no God, then who created the universe? And I always push back and say, why use the word created as if it's a created thing? But the simple answer is, I don't know. I don't know. And there's theories out there, and Armin brings these up, that there are, there's different theories of multiverse theories, inflation theories, and whatnot. But the big answer is, why can't we just say, we don't know? And let's leave it at that, as we then do science to try to figure it out. And so this is often the comment I will use, or response that I will use as well, to when I do atheist role plays. However, I don't think it's fair to say Christians are saying, well, I don't know, therefore now I have free range to just make something up, as if we're just making things up out of thin air. This is where I don't think this is an example of genuinely understanding the Christian view and representing it fairly. It's not just saying, oh, I don't know where the universe came from, and so I'm just going to make something up. God did it. There's actual reasons for how we get to the conclusions that we do. And so we're going to talk about that here in a little bit, but that was the first thing that stuck out here, is like, yes, I agree that not knowing an answer doesn't give you free range to just make it up, but that's not what Christians are doing. We have an explanation or reason or logic to how we got to the conclusion that we do. Now, he then says the same thing that I do in my atheist role plays. He goes to just say, well, I don't know, and therefore fill that gap with a God explanation is to create a God of the gaps. And he says, this creates a God of the gaps wherein God is invoked as an explanation in events that humans don't yet understand. The problem with this, of course, is that scientific knowledge is always expanding and the gap continues to grow smaller. Now, this is always referred to a God of the gaps, and I've discussed this in other videos throughout this series, and so I don't want to spend a ton of time here. The issue, though, is that it's not a God of the gaps argument, and this is often presented, and I feel like no matter how many times I say this, there's always people who say, nope, it's still God of the gaps, and maybe there's just, I'm not saying it well, I don't know, but in my mind at least, there's a difference between saying, I don't know, therefore God, and you're using God to fill a gap in a lack of knowledge, compared to saying, based on X, Y, and Z, therefore, or based on X and Y, therefore Z, based on these things, here's my conclusion. right? And so it's kind of like, I've often used the example of, a police officer showing up, and it's not saying, well, I don't know how he died, therefore murder. It's saying because there's bullet holes in his back, therefore murder. It's because of something. Now, maybe if you want to make it a little bit more complex, and how I want to add to it, is it's kind of like saying, look, based on, fingerprint data and X, Y, and Z, I think Bob is the murderer. And someone else saying, well, we don't know if it was Bob or not. And you're like, good, you're right. We don't know for sure. But based on these things, I think it's Bob. I'm not just saying I don't know and just randomly out of thin air picking Bob as an explanation, but there are some details that point to Bob. Now, a jury or other police officers, detectives may disagree and say, I don't think that those details point to Bob. But you have to at least recognize that the officer, the detective, is using some sort of details to get to Bob. It's based on a fingerprint or based on something. Hey, Wesley and Dizerner. Hey, guys. And Douglas. I'm going to come back to some of these thoughts. And if you have a specific question, you can put a Q there so I know you're actually asking me a question versus just kind of talking in the live chat. And so I think we have to recognize there's a difference between saying, look, I get that you're basing it off X, Y, and Z. I just don't think X, Y, and Z gets you there, versus saying you're just making things up out of thin air. Now, the question of, is that gap growing smaller? Well, yes, if you look at like over the last 1,000 years, we say, well, we thought rain was because the gods were crying, and thunder and lightning was Zeus throwing down lightning bolts, and the sea was, had waves because Poseidon was upset. In a sense that, yes, as we learn things about the natural world, these things in which God explanations were stuck in has grown smaller. But at the same time, you can argue that other discoveries has actually increased our gap, that we are finding complexity and design and information and fine-tuning and these sort of things that are often used in arguments for God's existence that is actually increasing the number of questions that we do have. And so it's kind of like, you just find a dead body and it's like, okay, maybe they're just dead. And it's like, okay, well, you find bullet holes. In one sense, your explanations shrink. Now it's not death by natural cause, it's murder. But in another sense, your possibilities now increase to where now if it's a murder, okay, now anyone who lives in this area could be that murderer. Now, who is it? Why? You may not know who. And so in one sense, your explanations have shrunk. It's not suicide, or it's not, death by natural causes. It's not accident. You have a murder. There's a shrinkage. But there's an expansion in other sense as now that possibility grows. And I think that while there have been ways in which a gap in knowledge has shrunk, that there are natural explanations for things like water and rain and thunder and lightning and seas and waves and whatnot, storms. I think in another sense, you can say, man, a lot of the information that we are finding in science is actually opening up our minds to bigger questions that still have not been answered. Origin of life, origin of the universe type of questions. And so I think there's something there as far as not only are we basing our answer on something, but I think it's not necessarily always growing smaller. And he says, Armin continues and says, look, if possible, this pattern will continue in the future, leaving little room for God as a weak explanation. And it's like, well, hey, possibly, but that's the question we're asking is, are there these things that will remain without natural explanations because maybe there is a different explanation, versus saying because these other things are natural, therefore this is probably natural as well. So that's kind of how he jumps into this chapter. Now, he then kind of looks at some big problems when it comes to the cosmological argument. Now, I'm looking at some questions that came in a live chat, and it looks like a lot of stuff has been deleted. And so I'm trying to figure out exactly where you got, what is being asked and what's not being asked. So I'll come back to that here in a moment. The first one is his section is on what he calls, the prime mover. And he says, the cosmological argument for God is an attempt to infer God's existence from known facts about the universe. So again, he thinks this is an attempt. It probably doesn't work, but it is an attempt to infer God's existence, as he says, based on the known facts about the universe. So what do we know? What are the facts that we know about the universe? And therefore, what is the best explanation for those facts? This is an argument from the best explanation. This is abductive reasoning. This is not fallacious arguments. You walk outside and it's wet all over the ground and you say, well, it must have rained. And you're inferring something based on facts that you see. Now, is it possible you're wrong and maybe it was the sprinklers that made things wet? Yes. but you're still basing your explanation off of known facts. And so you're not just making things up out of thin air. I mean, it would be crazy if it was like, everything is dry outside and you walk out and you're like, oh, it must have rained. You're like, wait, what? You're just making stuff up. But look, if you're basing a logical conclusion off of known facts, the ground is wet, it must have rained, then therefore, you're not just making things up out of thin air. However, he says, he goes on, he says, this is simply based on cause and effect. This argument states that because everything is derived based on cause and effect, something must have caused the universe to be created. And he goes, however, though, if you follow this event backwards through time, you will find a preceding event that led to it. But theists reason that this chain of events could not go on forever. Something must have started it all in motion. Since events cannot cause themselves, something else must have initiated or existed first to cause all of these things. Now, I think this is a strong argument. I'm going to bring up some of these points here in a moment. His response, though, is this. This might seem like a reasonable argument, but it falls victim to the same problem as the hypothetical God behind the argument from design as discussed in chapter 1. So you can go back to part 1 of my video there. If everything has a cause, he says, or a creator, then who created God? And who then created the entity that created God? So rather than solving the problem of infinite causality, the cosmological argument simply recreates the problem using different terms. Here's where I think there's a misunderstanding of the cosmological argument. As it is often presented in the Kalam cosmological argument, at least one formation that's probably the most popular, most well spread, it says that everything that begins to exist has a cause. It does not say that everything that exists has a cause. It does not say that everything has a creator. It says that created things have creators. Right? If you want to use more philosophical terms, contingent things that rely on something else for its existence. If it is contingent, then it relies on something else. So I am a contingent thing. I'm created. So who created me? My parents, right? I rely on my parents for my existence. The camera that I'm talking into right now is contingent. It's created. Therefore, you can say, well, then who created it? But in philosophy, there are contingent things and there are necessary things. A necessary thing is something that exists necessarily by definition. It just simply exists. And since it's not contingent, it's not created, therefore you don't ask who created it or where did it come from, because it wasn't created. It didn't come from anywhere. It exists necessarily by the necessity of its own nature. It is a self-existing thing. And so we have necessary things and contingent things. And so to ask this question, well, if everything has a creator, then who created God, is a big misunderstanding of the cosmological argument that does not say everything has a creator. It says that created things have creators, things that have a beginning. If something began to exist, then it has a cause. It doesn't say that everything has a cause, but just things that begin to exist. And so this often is presented or responded to as being a logical fallacy called a category fallacy. And so it's interesting, not only, it's kind of my pushback here, is not only does Armin use this argument as if it's valid, but then it doesn't even allude to the fact that a Christian would respond and say, well, hold on, this is a category fallacy. And what a category fallacy is where you apply the wrong category of question to the thing that you're talking about. So if I were to ask you, what does the color red smell like? Well, red does not have smell. You can say, well, rose. No, that's a rose. What does a rose smell like? Not what red. Red doesn't have smell. So to ask what red smells like is a nonsensical question. It's a category fallacy because it can't be answered. Well, it doesn't smell like anything because it doesn't have smell. It's like, if someone's singing and they go, oh, you go, wow, that was so beautiful, Ryan. How much did that note weigh? It's like, well, that note didn't have weight. You can say what it sounded like, what pitch was it, but you can't say what did it weigh because notes don't have weight in that sense. It's a category fallacy. And so to ask the question, who created an uncreated being, or what is the cause of a necessary thing? It's like, well, but it doesn't have a cause because it's not a caused thing. It doesn't have a creator because it's not a created thing. And so it asks the wrong type of question. It commits a category fallacy. So this is a really big thing that Christians we need to be careful of, is when presenting the cosmological argument, we should not say that everything has a cause. That's not true. It's that things that begin to exist have a cause, right? That is the common first premise. Things that begin to exist have a cause. Created things have creators. Not everything has a creator. And so it does not lead to this infinite causality problem that Armin reflects on here. It simply is. His objection is based on a misunderstanding. And so he says, look, you cannot solve a mystery by using a bigger mystery as the answer. And I think, well, you can in a sense, in the same way that you can say, look, how did this dead body die? By murder. And you go, well, you can't solve the dead body question. It's a mystery. How did they die? And if you try to solve the mystery on how they died with a bigger mystery of, well, if you say murder, well, then who murdered them? That's a bigger question. You can't solve this one mystery with another mystery. And the answer is, well, yes, you can. If it is an accurate solving to the first question, it may lead to further questions. The question, how did they die? We may solve that. Okay, it was a murder, not death by accident, but it may lead to a greater mystery. And so we can solve one question with a bigger question. And so when it comes to the cosmological argument, we can solve the question of what is the cause of our universe, or did our universe have a cause? And we can say, yes, it had a cause. A universe is not a necessary, eternally existing thing. It is contingent. It had a beginning. And that may lead to a bigger question of, okay, then what caused it? But just because there is another mystery that now needs to be solved doesn't mean that we can't answer the first question in that way. Hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully I'm understanding Armin's objection here accurately. Now, he then responds to this in a sense and says, well, if you're going to say that, well, God is uncaused, that he is a necessary being and the universe is contingent, he goes, this falls prey to special pleading fallacy, where you have one type of reasoning or an explanation that exists for one thing, but not something else. So in a sense, a Christian says, well, the universe can't be eternal, but God can. It's like, well, but who caused God? Well, he didn't have a cause. Well, then why not the universe? Well, that has to have a cause. And so you're using a different kind of standard for God, saying, well, he doesn't need to have a cause. He can be eternal, but the universe has to be caused. And so he says this is an example of special pleading, where he says here, special pleading is a specific type of hypocrisy that arises when someone realizes that the solution he's offering fails to live up to the rules he's already established. So if he establishes that everything needs a cause, everything has a creator, and you say, well, who created God? And you go, well, he doesn't need a creator. That's what he's calling special pleading. The pushback, though, my response is, well, that's not special pleading, because we're talking about two different categories of things. We're not saying everything has a creator. And you say, well, what about God? And I go, well, not him. That would be special pleading. We're saying all created things have a creator. All things that begin to exist have causes. Okay, well, what about God? Well, he didn't begin to exist. He's not a contingent thing. He's a necessary thing. And therefore, he doesn't fall into that same sort of category. Now, we'd obviously have to, if you're an atheist watching, you go, well, hey, why do you define God differently? Well, that's a good question. And we have to point to that. And there's reasons for it. But we have to first recognize how this is not special pleading. This is not this sort of fallacious argument that I think that Armin is talking about here. So he goes on, he says this, quote, in this type of fallacy, the rules apply to everything but the arguer's solution, which gets a special exemption for the rule despite there being no clear reason why that exemption should exist in the first place. That's what I think is interesting. He says there's no clear reason for why that exemption should be there in the first place. That there's no reason why a Christian can exempt God from needing a creator, but the universe needs a creator. And I thought, well, but it's very common knowledge for Christians to say, well, because God is not a contingent thing. God is not a created being. He is eternal. And so that would be an exemption of why God doesn't need a creator, because he's not a created being. And so I'm curious, like, I would love to see how would Armin, or if you're an atheist watching, how would Armin or you respond to that, of saying, no, there is a difference. And so this is not a special pleading. Here is the reason why there is an exemption in a sense for God. And he goes on to say, if everything requires a creator, why doesn't God? Well, not everything requires a creator. Only created things require a creator. And then he says, well, and if God doesn't require a creator, then why must everything else? Well, that's the whole point, is if we say, well, God doesn't need a creator, therefore nothing else does. Well, clearly there are created things, but the question is everything a created thing, or are there also uncreated things? I feel like I'm kind of beating this silly, but he kind of keeps bringing this up in different ways that I think could be helpful. So sorry if this is not helpful. You can comment and say move along. But this is where I think he has this misunderstanding. Not everything is created. Not everything is eternal. So the question then is why? Why do we believe this? He says, if we accept the idea that some things could exist without being created, as a theist claims for their God, why could this same logic not apply to the universe itself? Well, this is a great question. And the answer is, well, many atheists in human history have believed that our universe is something that is eternal into the past, that it did not have a beginning. This is a very common view that people held in the past. So why can't we say this is still true today? Why can't, if God can be uncreated, then why can't our universe be uncreated? Well, it's possible. It's possible that our universe is a necessary thing, that it has existed forever. The question, though, is what does the evidence point to? And there are two big problems with this. First is philosophical, is if our physical universe, meaning the time-space universe, is eternal into the past, then that means that we have an actual infinite number of past events. Now, philosophers talk about this and mathematicians talk about it, of how an actual infinite is, one, not possible, or at least has major philosophical mathematical problems. It has absurdities, right? In the sense that you could take an infinite minus an infinite and you can get zero. So infinite minus infinite, it comes out to zero. You could have an infinite minus an infinite and it still comes out to infinite. So you can take all the even numbers, minus all the, subtract all the odd numbers and subtract all the odd numbers out, and you still have an infinite. You can have an infinite set of numbers and minus 5 and you still have an infinite. You can have infinite minus a million and still have an infinite. And so you have these different answers, even though you are presenting different mathematical equations. And so mathematicians will talk about this idea of how actual infinites are not possible. And if the universe, and there's an infinite number of past events, if there's no beginning to this time-space universe and there's an infinite number of past events, then that would lead to an actual infinite which is mathematically impossible. And so that is one problematic area if we're going to say, well, our universe is eternal into the past. The second philosophical problem is that if there's an actual infinite number of past events, then philosophers will argue that we would never arrive at today, that we would have to transverse through an actual infinite number of events, and therefore today wouldn't happen. The fact that today is here means that there's a limited or a finite number of events in the past. So the example that I kind of use to try to make this sense to students is to say, look, if I'm going to run a race, or if we're going to enjoy a fireworks show, and you say, okay, in order to enjoy the fireworks show, we first have to set up some fireworks. And I say, okay, let's set up 5 fireworks and then we're going to light the fuse. But right before we light the fuse, you go, wait, let's set up one more firework. And we set up another one. And then right before we light the fuse, we go, wait, let's set up one more firework. And we set up another one. If we have to set up an infinite number of fireworks before we can ever light the fuse, are we ever going to get a fireworks show? And the answer is no, we're not. Now, if you're watching a fireworks show, you know that at some point they stopped setting up and they started the show, right? The same thing if you want to talk about running a race. If you're running a race, but right before the gun goes off to start the race, you go, wait, take a step back. And you have to infinitely keep stepping back before you can start running. Then the question is, will the race ever begin? Will you ever get to a finish line? And the answer is no, you'll never get to the finish line. You'll never get to this point in the race. And so if the same is true, if we have to go back an infinite number of past events, then we will never actually start the timeline, so to speak, and get to the present, which is today, and definitely not be able to run into the future, which is towards that finish line. If the race is being run, if the fireworks show is being watched, then you know at some point there was a stop and then there was a beginning. It can only go back. The runners can only go back a finite amount of distance backwards. And the same is true kind of philosophically when it comes to time, that in order to be today in the present, we cannot have transversed through an infinite number of past events, because if there's an infinite number of past events, there's always more past events to go through before we could get to today. And therefore today is not a reality. And so the fact that we live in a kind of a theory of time where there's a past, the past is the past, the present is now, the future is potential, leads to a philosophical conclusion that the past is not eternal, but had a finite beginning. So these were two philosophical, kind of mathematical reasons for why our physical universe with actual events cannot be eternal into the past, but must have had a beginning. Then physics comes along and cosmology comes along in the early 1900s and starts confirming this with Big Bang cosmology, talking about how that our time-space universe had a beginning at the Big Bang, that we come from this infinitely dense singularity, that literally our universe came, out of nothing. And you even have atheist physicists and theoretical physicists like Lawrence Krauss talking about a universe from nothing. Like, how did it come from nothing? He's trying to explain what nothing means, because that is the scientific consensus, is that our universe came from nothing. And so our universe did have a beginning. The time-space universe did have a beginning, and therefore there's not an infinite number of past events for our universe. And so with these arguments, to say philosophically and mathematically and scientifically, we now have reasons to believe that God, or that the universe, did have a beginning. And so if we're going to say, well, if God can be uncreated, why not the universe? Well, it could have been. And that's what many people believe for a while, until recent discoveries and philosophical arguments come out. And then we go, okay, we have good reason to believe that our universe is not past eternal. It's not a necessary thing that has existed on its own, by itself, that is self-existent. Instead, our universe had a beginning. Therefore, there must be a cause to our universe. And so it doesn't fall into the same category. And so with all that being said, Armin then jumps in and then kind of addresses some of the physics questions. Now, I realize I just kind of presented some big stuff on philosophy, math, and science. And so hopefully kind of you guys are tracking with me and you're with me in this. But he says, look, this is a misunderstanding of physics. And he then jumps in. Now, let me just say this really, in response to kind of this big section, is it's often objected that the cosmological argument misunderstands physics, that we don't know what happened at the beginning, that maybe physics breaks down, or there's other options. And I want to say this, is even if you rule out the physics and say, okay, let's say we don't understand the physics, and scientifically we don't know what happened, then it still doesn't lead to the conclusion that our universe is past eternal, because we have philosophical and mathematical reasons against an eternal past universe. And so it's not simply just on the science and the physics and the cosmology that Christians come to this conclusion that our universe had a beginning, but there are more arguments. So again, the premises of the cosmological argument is if, things that begin to exist have a cause. If you had a beginning, something caused it. Necessary things require causes, contingent things require causes. Then the second premise, the universe began to exist, and we have philosophical and scientific reasons to believe the universe began to exist. If that's true, our universe began to exist, and things that begin to exist need causes, then our universe would need a cause. And so that's kind of how this works. And so even if the physics is misunderstood, there are still other reasons. It's kind of like saying in a criminal trial, you got, fingerprint, you got eyewitness testimony, and you got video surveillance cameras. And it's like, well, the eyewitness testimony is bad, throw it out. Well, that doesn't automatically mean the person's innocent. If you still have fingerprints and video surveillance, footage of them doing the crime, then you can still convict them as being guilty. And so we actually, can't just dismiss it simply because one thing may be misunderstood. Now, with that, let me address what Armin says here on the misunderstanding of physics. Now, I'm not a physicist, but anyways, take this as you want. He says, for example, the universe or multiple universes could have existed forever with the same amount of matter and energy. Now, in this response, he's actually presenting what theists will say. Let me just jump back to the beginning of the paragraph. He says, well, the theist argument claims that the first law of thermodynamics proves that there's a need to be a source for all matter and energy in the universe. The fact that there are other ways that this could be true. For example, the universe or the multiverse could have existed forever with the same amount of matter and energy. Or as Lawrence Krauss presents, he then says the universe or multiple universes could have a positive and negative energy that add up to zero, as in zero energy. Now, where I think this also misses the mark is that that's only one aspect. Again, this is kind of partial things, and maybe he just has a lack of space, but these are partial things that what Christians will say. Is yes, based on the first law of thermodynamics, matter cannot be created or destroyed, but often in response to the cosmological argument, a Christian will present the second law of thermodynamics, showing that the universe is past finite, that there's a finite amount of time that's passed in the past. It's not here eternally. And the reason why is the second law of thermodynamics says that we are currently running out of usable energy. And so if we are currently running out of usable energy, if energy is being transferred from being usable to non-usable, then we can't have been running out of usable energy forever. If it's past eternal, then we would have run out by now. It's kind of like, my coffee that's sitting here is now cold. Well, because it's running out of energy and it's going from hot to cold. And if you find a hot cup of coffee, you know that it was poured recently. If you find a phone that still has a charge, you know it was unplugged recently. Why? Because the phone is slowly running out of energy. And if it was unplugged a month ago, a year ago, an infinite number of time ago, then it would have already gone dead. The coffee would have already gone cold. The same as with our universe. It would have gone cold. There would have been the heat death of our universe. Our universe would have gone cold because we're running out of usable energy. And so it's not necessarily just the first law of thermodynamics that says that our universe it can't be eternal. It's also the second law of thermodynamics that says that we're running out of this usable energy. So to simply say, well, maybe we have a multiverse or our universe that existed forever with the same amount of matter and energy. And therefore, hey, it was not created or destroyed. We fit within the first law of thermodynamics that says matter cannot be created or energy cannot be created or destroyed. Well, but you still have to deal with the second law, that we're running out of usable energy. And so that's why I wish I would have seen Armin respond to that thing. And so where he says the cosmological argument has a misunderstanding of physics and says, well, here's a possible solution to the issue of matter and energy being created and destroyed. Well, it doesn't present a solution or a response to, I think, the bigger reason that Christians give in defending a limited, created, universe with a beginning, which is the second law of thermodynamics. And then he says, in fact, if God can create matter and energy, well, why couldn't a natural process that we do not understand yet do the same as well? Well, because if all natural things came into existence at the Big Bang, then you can't have something natural causing it to happen because natural things hadn't existed yet. Just like I can't be the cause of something until I am born. I have to first exist before I can be the cause of something. And so to say, well, what if Ryan was the cause of Ryan? It's like, well, I first have to exist to cause something else. And so if we're talking about a natural process causing the natural world, well, that natural process can't exist to cause the natural world because the natural world didn't exist. Like that's kind of normal Big Bang cosmology. Stephen Hawking presented this, like almost everyone, he said, now believes that the universe and time itself, the space-time universe, had a beginning at the Big Bang. And so you can't then use natural processes to explain natural processes when you're trying to get an explanation for the natural processes. Does that make sense? That's at least how I understand it, how I would respond. And that's why then the cosmological argument is pointing to something unique about God. And that's what Armin gets into his last section. And then I am going to jump over here to the comment section as well. So if you're watching, you can send in those comments or call in as well. And so he says, in finishing this one, he says, rather requiring science to support your opinion about some things like thermodynamics, while ignoring it when it disagrees with your beliefs, like evolution, is a flagrant misappropriation of scientific principles. And I think that is a misunderstanding of why Christians accept some science and reject others. Like with every scientific field and discipline and area of study, and even what people say, you can be an atheist and say, I agree with some things Ryan says, but that doesn't mean you agree with everything. And just because you disagree with something doesn't mean that you disagree with everything. You can agree with some and disagree with others. And I often tell Christians this, you can agree with Big Bang cosmology and you can disagree with evolutionary biology. One is cosmology, one is biology. One could be right, the other wrong. There maybe could both be right and they can both be wrong. But just because one may be right doesn't mean they both are. And so one is the study of the universe, cosmology, physics. The other one is the study of living things, biology. These are two different scientific disciplines, and they're two different conclusions based on two different sets of evidences. And so you have to take each one on a case-by-case basis. And so to say, look, I think there's good reason to believe in the laws of thermodynamics, and therefore I can use this scientific evidence that I think is really well supported and founded to then build a conclusion that points to God in a cosmological argument. While I disagree with the evidence presented to support evolution, is not a misappropriation of the scientific principles, but it's just using your mind and checking the evidence and following the evidence where you think it leads. And so his last objection then is that the cosmological argument says nothing about God. And he says, look, even if we accept that there's some sort of prime mover or cause of our universe, there is no evidence to suggest that this force must conform to any of the traits generally attributed to God. There's no reason why that creator should necessarily be intelligent or have any sort of consciousness at all. And so let me give you a reason. He says there's no reason why the creator needs to be any sort of attribute of God, why it should be intelligent, or why it should be conscious at all. So let me give you a thought on why I think it does have attributes of God, it does have to be intelligent, and it actually does have to be conscious. The cosmological argument refers to our universe having a beginning. And what is defined by our universe is our space-time universe. We're talking about physical matter, we're talking about space, and we're talking about time itself. And again, there are non-Christian scientists who say that time, space, and matter had a beginning at the Big Bang. So if time, space, and matter started to exist at the Big Bang, then whatever the cause was cannot be made of time, space, and matter. Therefore, it has to be timeless, existing outside of time. It has to be immaterial, not material, because matter started to exist. Therefore, the cause cannot be matter. And it cannot be inside space, because space began to exist at the Big Bang. And so the cause has to be spaceless. And so again, this often gets pushed back and say, well, we don't know what was before the Big Bang. Well, you can still say we don't know, but there still are conclusions. And there are facts that we know that do rule certain things out. Again, let's go back to my murder scene. I think this is a good example. If you find a dead body, you may not know who murdered him. But based on the fact the dead body is found in California, you know it wasn't someone in France. You know it wasn't someone in Germany. There are certain people that you can rule out. It leads to certain conclusions based on some of the known facts that you have. If it was found in this area, it can only be people that were in that area at that time. And so you may not know who it was, but that doesn't mean that the answer to every single question is also, I don't know. You can actually have answers to some of these big questions. Now, so with that then, you say, well, maybe I don't know exactly what the cause was, but if the cause was something that caused matter, space, and time to come into existence, then that cause cannot be made of matter, exist in space, or be part of time. It has to be immaterial, spaceless, and timeless. Those three characteristics and attributes are consistent with a biblical definition of God. That God is an immaterial spirit, a disembodied mind, that he is timeless, existing outside of time, and that he then is also spaceless. He is omnipresent. He's not a physical thing that exists inside of space. And so based on these sort of things, if that's what our science is showing us, then we actually do get some attributes of God. Also, if we do point to the fact that there is some originating force of our universe, as Armin points here, or some sort of prime mover, whatever that mover was or whatever that force was would have had to be extremely powerful in order to create or cause an entire universe to come into existence. And so there has to be power involved. Well, a biblical definition of God is that he is omnipotent, that he is all powerful. And so here we have some characteristics that are consistent with a biblical God. It doesn't mean that Christianity is true and the Bible is true and it's the Christian God at this point. That's often another pushback to this argument is, well, you don't get to a Christian God. Maybe it's just some other sort of God, or maybe it's, okay, sure. But you do get the cause being immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and extremely powerful. And those are four characteristics or attributes that are generally attributed to God. And so for him to say there is no evidence to suggest that this force must conform to any of the traits generally attributed to God, I just gave you a reason at least, or some scientific evidence. Now you can disagree with the science, but this is, you can disagree whether that's good science. And there are some scientists that are saying this, like a Stephen Hawking, who is not a Christian. And so at least if that's what he's saying is true, then you do get these sort of attributes of God. He then says there's no reason to say that this creator must be intelligent. Well, if you go back to chapter 1 of this cause also designed and created a universe to function well, to have all of these fine-tuned properties of expansion rate and gravitational poles and strong and weak magnetic forces, and you have the right distance from the moon and sun and the right amount of oxygen, you have all this stuff where our universe has been fine-tuned and designed for life, you have to be very intelligent. If we have this structure of our bodies and DNA with information, well, information points to intelligent. Computer programmers point to amazing people that can program. Buildings point to intelligent builders and architects. And so if we do have this created universe, then to create an entire universe, you would have to be extremely intelligent. So there is a reason to say that this creator or cause of our universe would need to be intelligent to be able to design and build a universe that could sustain advanced, intelligent life. It doesn't make sense to say all of this stuff created around us. My phone requires intelligent programmers and designers, and my coffee mug even, takes an intelligent person to be able to make that out of clay. But the universe itself doesn't. It can just come about by non-intelligent purposes. I think, no, we recognize that created things require intelligence to create and build them and design them. And so therefore, our universe, I think, would be pointed to as well for that. The last thing then is he says, it would not necessarily have to, there's no reason the creator should necessarily have any sort of consciousness. William Lane Craig often presents this and say, okay, if we look at the scientific and philosophical data that our universe had a beginning, and the universe is the time-space universe where we have all matter, space, and time coming into existence, there's only two things that we know about that are timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. That would be, number one, abstract objects like numbers and a disembodied mind. But we know that non-conscious abstract objects like numbers do not have causal powers, cannot create. Numbers cannot choose to create. Forces like gravity don't make choices. And so to go from not falling to falling, no, if gravity's always existed, then it's always pulling. And so to go from non-existence to existence, a choice had to be made. I've heard some atheists kind of present the argument of, well, if our universe is always, frozen, then you always have something frozen. It's like, yeah. So if you've gone from water being not frozen at one point and then frozen at another point, you know that our universe has not always been below freezing temperature, but instead there was a time in which it wasn't below freezing and now it is. Something caused that change. There's a change that happened. And so all that to say is that we have two things that we know of that are immaterial, spaceless, timeless, and that would be abstract objects like numbers, which don't have the power to create. And then we have disembodied minds. And minds do have the ability to create. Consciousness does have the ability to make that choice. A conscious creature like a human can go from one thing to the next, can make a choice to create or not create and destroy and turn the air up and turn it down and put something in and out of the freezer. And we can affect changes because consciousness can make those changes. And so I think to go from non-existence to existence does require consciousness because abstract objects don't have that ability. And so I think that we do lead to, or at least this argument can, when presented well, and I think understood well, can say, look, we have a conscious, therefore personal, intelligent, powerful, timeless, spaceless, immaterial cause of our universe. What fits that description? What fits that category? Well, that perfectly matches the God of the Bible. It doesn't prove quite yet that that's the God of the Bible, but it is consistent with the God of the Bible. And so we can then look at the design argument to even look at more intelligence. We can look at the moral argument to say that this cause of the universe is morally good. And then I think we look at the truth and reliability of Scripture. We look at the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, and we can get to that this cause of the universe is the God who's revealed himself in the Bible through the person of Jesus Christ and has died and risen from the dead on the cross for the forgiveness of sins. And I think that then comes now. That doesn't all come from this one argument, but we get something consistent with a biblical God, and then we look at other pieces. Just like in a murder scene, this is the last time I'll bring up a murder scene. Just like in a murder scene, if you're like, hey, your fingerprint, shows that this person was here. It doesn't lead to him being guilty, but at least it shows that he was present. And then you have other pieces of evidence that complete the picture and get the whole story. And so the cosmological argument simply points to the fact that there is a timeless, spaceless, immaterial, intelligent, powerful, personal, conscious cause of our universe. Then we look at other arguments and other pieces of evidence to actually boil that down to this is the God of Christianity. But at least this argument is consistent with the God of Christianity. So I think these objections, in my personal opinion, as I've tried to explain, I don't think they go through at showing this to be a bad argument. I think this is one of the most powerful, persuasive arguments. I know people that have been persuaded by this. And I think it's something that Christians can use and is powerful when used well. So that is chapter 11. Now, the next chapter is My Religion, chapter 12, My Religion or God Has Helped Me So Much. How could it not be real? And we're going to get to that. But next week, let me just say this next week, and then I'm coming over to the comment section, and I have some stuff that came in as well on YouTube, is next week is a postponed video from the past where an atheist commented in on one of my shows and said, here's 11 things to consider when asking the question if God exists. And he had agreed to come on the show, and I set up that conversation, and I came here and I waited for him to come, and he didn't come. So whether he got busy or something came up. And so I rescheduled it, and I sent him information. And so I'm going to cover that next week on the normal show, which is Tuesday around 1:30 in the afternoon, California Pacific time. If he shows up, awesome. If not, I'll just kind of walk through what he sent, and that'll be the show next week. And then we'll follow up with part 12 after that. So you can always subscribe and stay up to date on what is coming out there. Now, one thing I want to address, though, is an objection, actually, a question that came in today on YouTube. And I asked the person, I said, hey, would you be willing to come on the show and talk through this? Because I think it's good. And they said, I'd prefer not. And so I said, okay, cool. Well, then I will respond here. And so where did it go? Okay. This came in on YouTube on my video, actually on one of my shorts, seeking the best explanation for our universe. I guess it's relevant to this video. And he says, I'm no expert in anything, but if the universe is designed, would that mean that all of the unpleasant things in it are by design too? So my response was, well, not necessarily, because as a Christian, we also believe in the doctrine of the fall, that we believe our world is fallen, that a lot of the curses and brokenness and evil, pain, and suffering is a result of the sin of Adam and Eve, that they kind of corrupted this good creation that God created. And now we have a lot of this brokenness, and God is in a plan of, initiated the plan of redeeming and restoring all things. And so a lot of the brokenness that we have is a result of the fall, not by design. Now, some of the limitations we do have are by design. I can't fly in the air like a bird. That's not just because of sin. That's because I'm a human, not a bird. And so there are designed limitations. But then there are also broken things, like my eyes needing contacts to see is a broken thing, and that's not a design, but that is a result of the fall. So his response then was, but if the fall is true, then it makes God look like a monster. I'm assuming the fall refers to Adam and Eve. Punishing people for the things their ancestors did is immoral. Kicking Adam and Eve out was their punishment. If true, it is a punishment we are still experiencing. And he says, I just thought of something else. If you believe in an all-powerful, all-knowing God, then God would have known the fall would happen, almost like it was part of his plan or design. And so that's when I said, hey, I'm doing a live show. Would you want to come on and chat about it? And he said, no, he would love to, but he can't. And so I thought, okay, well, then I'll just kind of talk about it briefly here. So let's just start really quickly. If the fall is true, then it looks like God is a monster, because we are being punished for the things that Adam and Eve did. Well, not necessarily. There are consequences. So it is true. And this is, I have a video I did a long time ago, actually, responding to, I wonder if I can find it here really, really fast. Responding to an Indian, kind of anti-Christian apologist from India. And it was, here, I'm going to pull it up here really quickly. Let's see, does this pull it up? Yeah, there we go. Ex-Christian gives arguments against the Bible, is what it's titled, from 3 years ago. And it was a YouTuber that was sent to me by someone from India saying, hey, here's someone who does anti-Christian videos. Would you please respond? And so I responded to this comment. And in the video, she addresses kind of objections in the Bible. And one of her objections, or contradictions in the Bible, one of the contradictions is that you do suffer from the sins of your parents. And then another verse that says you're not being judged, or you are being judged and you're not being judged for the sin of your parents. I forget the exact language. It's been 3 years since I did the video. But what I remember, and what is true, is this. Scripture is very clear that we are judged according to the things that we have done, right? If you want to look up a passage on this, Revelation chapter 20. Let me pull it up here really quick. Revelation chapter 20, starting in verse 11 is the great white throne of judgment. So here's our final judgment, starting in verse 11, Revelation 20. Then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it. For his presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books according to what they had done. And so Revelation here, and I think this is consistent other places, shows that we are judged according to what we have done. And so I am not sent to hell, or non-believers are not sent to hell because Adam and Eve sinned. You will be judged based on what you have done, the wrongs that you have committed, and whether you have trusted in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. That is the personal choice that you have to atone, where Christ is going to atone for your sins and the things that we have each done. For Romans says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, that we've all committed wrongs that we are deserving of. At the same time, we recognize that we do suffer from the sins of our parents. That when parents make really, really bad choices, it affects their kids. And sometimes it affects for multiple generations, where you can do something that really sends your family in a downward spiral that does have consequences. And so it's like, if I start screwing around and I get fired from my job and I lose my work and I can't get work because I do something really dumb and get myself arrested, is that going to affect my sons? Absolutely. Well, are they being punished for my wrong choice? Well, not necessarily, but they are going through suffering because of me, right? And so in a sense, they are being punished, in the sense they're suffering and bad stuff is happening to them, but not because they made a certain choice. They're not morally accountable for that choice because it wasn't their choice to make, but our actions absolutely do affect others. And so for Adam and Eve to sin, they made a choice that does have a ripple effect on the rest of humanity as they corrupted their natures, and they have now been passing along corrupted natures ever since. And so we are born with this fallen, our nature is fallen and sinful because of what they've done. As sin entered through one man, as Romans says, so the forgiveness of sin is also through one man, of Jesus Christ. And so we recognize, and what I would say is this, is God is not a moral monster because of this. I'm still only being judged based on my choices, but the choice of Adam and Eve did have a ripple effect on the rest of us. And that doesn't make God evil. We're not being punished because of what they did, but we are affected by what they did, just like our choices today affect those around us. What you do has an effect on others. And so we have to consider that when we are looking at the choices around us. The second thing that he addressed is that if God is all powerful and knowing, then God would have known the fall would happen, almost like it was part of a plan or design. Now, I think God did create, knowing the Garden of Eden was not his eternal resting place. Right before the foundations of the world, he knew that humans would fall, that Jesus Christ would come to save us and redeem us from our sins, and that he had a new heaven and new earth that was our future plan, that is our eternal resting place. And so we recognize that. And as the comment just came in, corporate punishment is a real thing in Scripture. And often because what we see is people being punished for the sins of their fathers is because then they are complicit in it as well, right? If I am living a very sinful, evil, wicked lifestyle, I often bring my kids into that where then they participate in it. And it is a result of me, but then their participation in it also leads to them being punished as well. Just like if you're hanging out with a group of people, and this happened to me in high school, I was hanging out with a group of friends and they were doing something really stupid and the teacher came out and caught us all and I was with them. And so I got in trouble. And so there's a guilt by association, so to speak, of I was part of the group and I wasn't saying, hey, this is wrong. Let's step away. Let's go somewhere else. I didn't just leave them to do what they were doing. And so it was actually really dumb. They were pounding on the outside of the gym door during an event. And I was standing there because we were trying to get in. And so I was down there. I was not the one pounding on the door, but I was standing there and the teacher came out and got us all in trouble. So there is a corporate punishment, but it's often when you are guilt by association, you're part of it because you've been drawn in by choices of others as well. But there's not necessarily, I think, biblically the sense of that innocent people are going to be judged and sent to hell because of what Adam and Eve did. We're not innocent. We've all done wrong. But then the question here is, okay, is it part of his plan or design? Well, in one sense, he did plan for this to happen, but it's not causing. Right. And we talked about this, there's an atheist that called in on the show a while back, and we talked about this more in depth, but that God, his knowledge of the future does not cause, right? Knowledge does not stand in a causal relationship with the physical world. And the atheist there agreed with that. God knowing that Adam and Eve would sin and that they would fall away is in no way him causing them to sin. He was not making them sin. He just knew that they would. And so him being all powerful, all knowing, now, could God have kept them? Well, in a sense, yes. But then how would he have kept them? Well, he could have taken away their free will. And the question is that a better world? It's like, how could I keep my phone from dying? Well, I could just keep it on a charger 100% of the time. Well, but now I'm severely limited. I can't go anywhere without my phone, right? In order to go out to the store, I need to unplug it, right? And so there are aspects of say, well, is it better to have it never die, or is it better to have to plug it in every now and then, right? There's designed give and take with everything. And so I think God knowing free will is better than us being robots. Free will enables us to have true love and be in relationship and choose him. That does then allow for the possibility of us to fall away. And so God knew that humans would use their free will wrongly. But you can't give people free will and then never allow them to use it wrongly. That's not logical. Then they don't have free will. And so there are these designed features and limitations of like, well, yeah, God is all powerful, so he could stop them. And then in what sense of how does he stop them? And is that actually a better world? And so I think that these are good questions to kind of think through. What does it look like for God to be a good creator and sustainer of the world when we are experiencing a lot of fallenness and brokenness? And so that's what these are good questions and why I wanted to respond here. So let me jump over here to the comment section. I don't see any that have come in on Instagram. So you all, well, have fun. No. YouTube. From a skeptic's point of view, let me just kind of skim through these here really quickly and make sure I don't miss anything. From a skeptic's point of view, nothing has been strictly observed coming into existence, so it's quite a jump to make the inference. It does feel intuitive, but that's not enough. Again, not enough for what? I get how these philosophical arguments often work is you can't prove it beyond any doubt. The question is it more plausibly true than not? And as long as we have a recognition of an entire universe based on entire scientific discipline based on cause and effect, if we're going to say, well, maybe there's not cause and effect, well, it's like that's what all of science is based on. And so we have this presupposition that founds and grounds almost all of science is cause and effect relationships. The fact that we have never seen or observed anything come into existence uncaused, everything around us is caused. I think these are inferences that we can say, look, this makes it more probable than not that things that begin to exist have causes. And until we find some evidence otherwise, it's kind of like the atheist when it comes to God. It's like, man, based on everything having a natural explanation so far, yeah, I don't know where the origin of the universe, but I'm going to assume it's natural unless you can show me otherwise based on everything I see. So this is similar to the atheist is saying, look, based on everything I'm aware of, everything I see around me is physical. So unless you can provide good evidence for a soul, I'm just going to assume everything is physical. And that is I think a reasonable thing to conclude unless you can present evidence for a soul. And in the same way, I think the Christian is saying, based on everything that we know and the foundations of science being cause and effect, and there's never been an observed thing come into existence uncaused, that's a good reason to at least say, unless you have a really good reason to believe otherwise, I'm going to say that things that begin to exist have causes. And that is more probable true than not, unless you can provide something else. And so that is, I think, kind of the thought process behind that first premise. Douglas, so I'm not sure what happened. I'm not deleting your comment. Yeah, as Slam said, your comment was not deleted by us. I like the actual infinite argument, says Disner. One could try to argue that all moments of time are not necessarily sequential, but all exist simultaneously from a timeless reference point, so they are not traversed. Now, maybe I'm misunderstanding this a little bit. I'll put it here for everyone else to see. This then gets into a huge philosophical argument, which I don't have time today because I do have to run soon. My son is waking up. That is what sort of theories of time do we have? Do we hold to an A theory of time? Is it a B theory of time? Do we have this static block? B theory of time is a static block of time that exists. Here's the beginning, here's the end, and then all the events of time are between, and it's this unchanging static block of time. And therefore, all moments of time are not sequential necessarily, but exist simultaneously. Now, that's one view that people have. I think there are huge problems to that. Maybe we can talk more about this next week. But I think that leads to a lot of absurdities in our understanding and the nature of time. Instead, I personally would hold to an A theory of time, which pretty much says is time is how we observe it, is that the past is the past, the future, the present is now, and the future is only potential. Our future has not happened. In a B theory, I think B theory leads to determinism. My future is set. There's nothing I can do to change it, and therefore I have no free will whatsoever because it is a static block of time. Everything exists simultaneously. I think that completely erodes any sense of free will. I also think there's a huge problem of identity in that framework. Again, I'm sorry, bringing up these problems I don't have time to get into. If you want to talk about it more, you can put here and I'm happy to address it in the next show. Instead, I think that the A theory makes more sense. And so we do have this all moments of time are sequential moments of time, and that is how we track time. And so this question gets into a big philosophical, theories of time discussion and argument that I'd be happy to address another time. But I think that's kind of at least how I stand, is I reject a B theory, hold to an A theory of time, and therefore I think the actual infinite argument does hold weight for that reason. Let's see. Okay, so I'm not seeing other questions necessarily. So with that, let me finish up our time here by saying, look, it's so good to be back. I'm happy to be here. Again, I hope that you're enjoying this series. I just started my book on natural theology. I mentioned a while back that the next book I'm going to go through is on natural theology and understanding how we can make arguments for God and Christianity based on nature and what we see around us. That's what natural theology is. And so I've really kind of enjoyed this book series. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from this book series of kind of walking through a book chapter by chapter and kind of reasoning and arguing through it. So the next one's going to be through a Christian book of looking at natural theology. And I've started reading that, and I'm enjoying it so far. So we have, I guess, 9 parts left in this, or 8 parts. We just did 11. So yeah, we got 9 left. So hopefully you've enjoyed this series as well, kind of thinking through these arguments. Again, next week is the week after is chapter 12, where Armin addresses this argument for God that says, my religion or God has helped me so much. How could it not be real? So we're going to look at what Christians are trying to argue for there and Armin's responses and objections to that. So with that, thanks for being here. Thanks for enjoying and participating and commenting. I love the interaction. Again, if you want to call in, join live. I'm most likely going to be live next Tuesday. I don't know the date for that. I think it's the 10th of September or so, somewhere around there. I can pull up my calendar here really quickly. September 10, Tuesday at about 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. If you want to call and join in live, and I'd love to discuss with you, whether you're Christian or atheist, just kind of think through the objections that you have, and then also continue to be a resource for you to think well about these different things. I never even said that at the beginning. This is the show Think Well, to train you to think well about culture and Christian faith, to have better conversations and engage the culture well. And my name is Ryan Pauly. So other videos will pop up here on the side if you're on YouTube to help you to continue to think well about different issues that come up around you. And with that, having a wonderful weekend, and I will see you in just a few days on Tuesday to talk about 11 things that you should consider before accepting a belief in God. So until then, have a wonderful time and continue to think deeply about God, Christianity, and Jesus, because they are worth thinking about. Bye, everyone. Thanks for being here.